We are here with Adrian Louw, program integrator of the Radio Bushi, and Brenda Leonard, that is a manager, director. We are going to talk about the experience of the radio. Okay. Who, when was the radio started, and who started it, and kind of why?
Okay. I think the idea of bush radio started in the late 80s. There was a project called Cassette Education Trust that basically produced cassettes, information on cassettes. And they would go to marches and political meetings and record that and produce that information on cassette. So that process took quite long, and people felt there's a need for something quicker because of the political environment where activists would be arrested during the night, and you needed to get that kind of information out. So meetings took place between activists of the time, Cassette, and a number of other organizations, and they then decided to start Bush Radio, or a community radio station. And because those meetings took place at UWC, which was called which was called Bush, they decided to call the radio station Bush Radio. Now, all of that took place late 80s, early 90s. Bush Radio was then officially formed with the merger of this entity, Bush Radio, and Cassette Education Trust, and Bush Radio took over the premises of Cassette as well, and as well as the responsibilities of Cassette of producing information on cassettes. And then Bush Radio then applied for license to the Apartheid government, did not get it, and then decided to actually broadcast without a license. Basically, the argument was that the government is illegitimate. We don't recognize the government, so we shouldn't be recognizing the laws of the government as well. And because of that, we are broadcasting, and made a huge campaign there to get a lot of help because of apartheid. Black people didn't have access to like transmitters, etc., etc. So get a lot of help from other people, from the black diplomatic world, and so on, and eventually could broadcast. So Bush Radio then broadcasted on the 1st of May 1993. 1993 for 4 hours, and then the government came, and they took the next day, the Monday, the post office and security police came, and they confiscated the transmitter, which was a sort of a homemade transmitter. It wasn't a board transmitter. They took that, and they took several other pieces of equipment, and they then arrested 2 people. The one was the coordinator of Bush Radio, like on the staff, and the chairperson of the trustees. Those 2 people, and they were charged in court with possession of broadcasting apparatus, which was the transmitter, etc., using those apparatus for broadcasting purposes without the license, and then thirdly, defeating the ends of justice. So they were charged with that. The case went on for a year, leading up to 1994. Now, during that time, obviously, there was a lot of, our country was in transition, leading up to the elections that was going to take place on the 27th of April 1994. Because of that, a number of things took place. One, there was independent media council was set up. That was part of the negotiation process leading up to the elections, firstly, and then secondly, there were 4 right-wing white stations that actually were set up, and they started broadcasting, and they were broadcasting without a license, but they weren't taken off air at Bush Radio. And then the lawyers then used that as arguments, and the case was kicked out of court. It was kicked out, we got our transmitter back, everything. But because we were very close to the elections, it was like a few months leading up to the elections, we then decided, listen, we fought for democracy, we're not going to undermine this process. So let's wait until after the elections and see what our next action is going to be. And based on that, we then decided not to continue broadcasting illegally, but wait until after the elections, which, as I mentioned, took place in 27th April 1994. And then what happened after that, I think the first, an IBA, Independent Broadcasting Authority, was set up, and they were set up basically to regulate broadcasting in the country. And the first thing they did was to actually look at the licensing of community radio. So they called, for stations to apply. We were one of the stations that applied, but we only got the license. The process, there were so many applications, and there were huge problems in the cities. So what the IBA did at that time, they licensed all the rural areas first, and then they went to the three major cities, Johannesburg, Durban, and Cape Town, and we were lost. And then they licensed. We got our license to broadcast in June, July, but we only broadcasted. We decided our date of broadcast would be the 9th of August, 1995. Because that was National Women's Day, and in recognition of the role that women played to bring Bush Radio to where it was. So that's how we started. A long way of saying that.
Just make sure that it's going.
It's recording.
Yeah. And well, at that point that you were like at the beginning of the democratic process, more maybe after the election from that point, who are the people that really got involved with the radio? Are very young people, are more intellectual kind of people from the community, or more involved, politically involved people? How was the special characteristics? Do you have these or not for the people that got involved with the radio?
Yes. The people that were involved in radio, one was students. So from journalism students to other students maybe that were involved in organizations on campus like SASPO. SASPO was the South African Student Press Union. So they were involved in Bush Radio. Then you also had representatives from organizations. So you had like COSATU, the trade union, being represented in Bush Radio, and they would send people. And then just activists became involved in Bush Radio as well. At that stage, it was a lot of, before we broadcasted, it was a lot of the people that actually formed the station. And once we started broadcasting, other people within the community also joined the station.
Yeah. Many activists from various organizations, children's rights, rape crisis, things like organization like Molo Songololo. So a lot of people drawn from different organizations. Many of them not media people or radio people, but they kind of had an idea of what this could possibly become, and how they could possibly use it. So that was important for them. Many of them were trained to go on radio. Some didn't, weren't comfortable going on the radio, or it wasn't part of their work, but they did realize the importance of it, or why they should be part of it. So a very wide range of Cape Townians really part of the station. But like with any media movement and in such a change, a lot of young people, even today you see the average age is probably 24, if that, if not a bit younger. We have older volunteers, but predominantly 24, 25, early young people getting into the industry, and that continues up until today. So it's a lot of young people sort of finding their feet, beginning their careers in the radio. That really hasn't changed much. And then, yeah, some of the older people more involved in, maybe advice or projects or those sort of things.
Okay, and you do have a very strong connection with the students from the university either? The media students?
Initially, like Brenda was saying, UWC, the University of the Western Cape. In fact, you'll still, some older people might refer to UWC as Bush, because physically where it was located, now it's a different situation with industrialization and the building up. But before, literally, the university there was bush around it, so everybody called it Bush. And one of the stories around the founding of the name of Bush Radio actually relates to some of the first meetings that were held there, where they decided, we need to show people what this is, because you have to understand at that time there was no free media. So this was a foreign concept to people. They didn't understand, what do you talk about? What do you mean when you say I can speak in my language? What do you mean I can, raise any issue? What do you mean? We don't understand. So one of the things they did was actually set up a demo radio station at the campus. And because they were there, they just, they thought of a name. Oh, okay, let's just call it Bush Radio, because we are there. And that's one of the stories that Edric related still in one of the documentaries. But in terms of students, I think a lot of students come through the station, some of it formal, like maybe from the CPUT, but there's not a direct link with the UWC students at the moment, other than people that possibly volunteer, that come through, which is just quite interesting, because UWC is one of the few campuses that doesn't have a campus radio station. Yeah, and interestingly enough, the model that Bush Radio used is really a hybrid of the North American volunteer model, but then also strongly influenced by Australia as well as South America, in terms of establishing community radio. Because I mean, we always, the tin miners of
Bolivia, I think.
the oldest community radio station is in South America, or at least the initial founding of community radio worldwide. As a priest, a tin who ran a radio station with tin miners in Bolivia, I think. Yeah. And sort of that inclusive volunteer model, whether it's worked or not is an interesting phenomenon, because the question is always, can people volunteer when they're unemployed? How do we get people, so it's been an interesting struggle over the years. But in terms of the characters and people, I mean, there have been so many, from actors, people that have gone on to big things, both in terms of media, but even legislation. I mean, the SASPU member that Brenda was talking about, I mean, there's video footage of him toying in front of the SABC, protesting for change. He's now
He was on SABC board.
He ended up on the SABC board at one stage. So many, from the disabled movement, media, general media, many people that have gone on to many different things. Some people lecturing, maybe like Jean Detoy and Tanya Bosch, that were volunteers, that were sort of interested in media, and then ended up making it their career in terms of education. And people that have started businesses, for instance, like Matthew, who builds studios now for a living. That's his job. He builds studios. So yeah, a lot of people over the years.
I think that time, because Adrian mentioned that we didn't know what and how, because we weren't exposed to it. So the what and how came from I think a number of those people that were involved. Matt came from the UK as a young intern. He came to Bush Radio, so there he had some exposure. Then Gabriel Orgoiti, he was a medical, or he is still a medical doctor, but at that time he was based at a hospital in Khayelitsha, a day hospital in Khayelitsha, and he came from Chile, and he had that experience of using community radio for health messaging, and he was involved. For instance, Edric was a what do you call it? Conscientious objector.
White males had to go to the military.
Military, yes, and he refused to go to the military. And you had a choice: if you refuse, you go to prison, or you skip the country. And he actually lived in Zimbabwe, where he was involved in the national broadcaster, ZBC, Zimbabwean Broadcasting Corporation. And after 1990, you could come back and assist in Bush Radio, in the know-how. So the know-how came from different people.
Sweden, like Ingrid.
Yeah, yes. Sweden, he said Australia. People came, and they came from community radio stations, and they came to do training and preparing the volunteers for this broadcasting. So those are the type of people that were involved. I mentioned the transmitter. The transmitter came in through the German diplomatic pouch, and it was brought in pieces and assembled at what is now CPUT. At that time it was Pentec. So it was a lot of goodwill and people using their know-how to support Bush Radio.
Okay, being a community radio leads you mostly to the local issues, or you are always going through the local and the city and the national and the international issues? How all these come together on this radio?
Yeah, I think for us, our priority is what happens on the Cape Flats. So, for instance, our news triangle, if you will be local Cape Flats first, Western Cape, South Africa, Southern Africa, Africa, and then the rest of the world. However, an important part for us is to draw linkages between what is going on internationally and locally too. So, for instance, you'll hear a talk on Bush Radio about child Nike workers in Indonesia. Because for us that's important to expose people to those sort of issues. And it's not to ghettoize issues, because we believe that we have to expose people to various issues. So even though our main focus and our priority is the Cape Flats and what goes on in the Cape Flats, we do look for examples from outside as well of what is happening. How does the drug... A very simple example would be domestic violence is big on the Cape Flats. It's a big issue. However, if you look at the situation about 15 years ago in Washington, D.C., in the black suburbs, per percentage it was higher than what was happening on the Cape Flats. And our previous MD actually made contact with people who were researching this and what is the phenomenon and how radio could possibly help. And what we did was we ended up localizing some of their radio dramas, mini dramas, on Bush as well. Because, there was a parallel that we could relate to. The same with Northern Ireland in terms of violence. We have a project we worked with. They're now defunct, unfortunately, an organization called Public Achievement, which also dealt with youth and violence and the effects of conflict. Because we came from a conflict situation. I mean, a lot of times South Africans want to couch it in, a nice way, but it was war, essentially.
Whitewash our history.
Yeah, there's sort of this idea of whitewashing our history. But we were at conflict. I mean, this is why we have issues of domestic violence, alcoholism, drug abuse. The drug situation in the Cape Flats was directly linked to the apartheid government actually allowing drugs to come into the Cape Flats. Drugs from India, man drugs, etc. I always go on about that because it's a horse tranquilizer. But allowing that, the manufacture of TIC, the SA Defence Force was actually involved in because they wanted to use, ecstasy. Because they wanted to use it as a way of controlling crowds, through the water, through spraying them with water. So many of those issues, we need to find linkages. But our priority is the Cape Flats, specifically what goes on in the Cape Flats. So you hear on average during the day or during a week, we have, if I counted, at least 15 to 20, and this is just in 1 2-hour slot throughout the week, at least 15 different NGOs, non-governmental organizations, coming in to talk. And that's just one show. That's one show. But you do also see a change besides the even though that is still a priority, you do see the need now for, as young people have developed businesses. So there's little, we kind of don't always charge for, we'll charge a ShopRite, a big company like ShopRite. But then we look at this one person business who's, maybe a young black woman from the township who's starting something, whether it be fashion or something. We don't frown upon it. We don't go, oh, it's frivolous, it's fashion. We give a little bit of airtime because it's important. It helps build industry. So it's a mixed bag in terms of the programming, from music through to politics. It's never. It's a very mixed bag, and I think how I would define it as different from what you find now, because commercial stations have realized that there's a value in linking with the audience in the way community radio stations does. So I think what makes us still unique up to today is that we're not trying to sell products to people. Actually, if I look at it quite harshly, that's really the only major difference at the moment, that we're not pushing product all the time. Now if you look at SABC, which is the public broadcaster, it's product. Commercial stations don't even bother. It's it's 8 to 10 minutes of advertising, 25 minutes of music, per half an hour.
And 90 seconds of talk.
Yeah, 90 seconds of talk.
But I think what Adrian said, what makes us different to other broadcasters, is exactly what you talked about in terms of the exposure in interviews and addressing the challenges that we do, because we don't frivolize the issues. Even though commercial will focus on those issues, they will give that NGO that interview, but they're only going to do it in like 90 seconds. So they're going to ask 3 questions and that's it. Whereas we will actually go in more depth about the issue. So, and I think that sets us apart. The same with our news, etc., etc.
Okay, and then since you said before that it's very difficult to ask people that are unemployed to volunteer, and but we know that that's not impossible. Depends on the dreams of each person, and how is today possible to keep building democracy brick by brick, as you say, and I agree. And then that we do have mostly, even the majority of the community in South Africa being black, we do have a lot of black people are still unemployed, living in the townships and having not really good jobs. And I think that this comes from education, and then how is possible to help changing the way that people are being, how the schools are working, instead of putting everybody on the same line, maybe changing way of teaching for making people to be more creative, and then they could help on finding solutions for more than being everybody the same. No, is there any way that the radio is doing, or can, I think that it is doing already, but it can, how it works for you thinking about this?
I think that question has a lot of angles to it. It covers a wide spectrum of issues. I think Bush Radio, if we look at how we offer exposure to media to young people, one, we have different. Okay, we have a very small staff. Currently, we have 4 staff members, full-time staff members. Everyone else that's here, and we have 24 people on the premises every day. Everyone else is during the daytime. It's either in intern, so they're here for a period. They a trainee, where they're being trained in a particular field, or they hear from a university doing an internship or job shadowing from a school. So those are the people. What we do twice a year, we recruit people, and we do an open call so anyone can apply. We then go through a selection process and select a group of people that we train for the next year. Okay? And they are then exposed as producers. So we train them, like in a lecture situation, we train them so that they have the skills. And then after that, and that takes about a month, and after that they go work in our programming office. So producer, presenters, news, we have someone in admin as well, sales, etc. So the core of the station, the operation of the station is actually done by either trainees or interns. In the afternoon, from 7 o'clock in the afternoon, evening, until the next day, they actually operate on volunteers. So those are the people that are fortunate enough to have a work, or comedians that does shows, etc. They then cover the afternoon hours. And the same for Friday, 7 o'clock until Monday morning at 6 o'clock. We actually have completely volunteers. And that's about the last count we did was about 108 volunteers. We have 24 interns or trainees, 4 full-time staff, and that's the makeup of Bush Radio. I think with the job shadowing, if there's a student at school that are interested in media, but they're not sure, so they want to see what it looks like before they go study, we give them an opportunity as well. The interns come without any, we don't require any form of media training or skills. So we're not looking at journalism students, for instance. Anyone within the community can be selected. And we've had people here from security guards, that worked as a security guard that wants to be exposed to media, to sometimes a journalism student, to people that were unemployed and didn't know what they wanted to do. And after the year, they then decide, I'm going to study media and go and study further. So I think that's the makeup of Bush Radio. And I think to come back to your question earlier in terms of the exposure and not the exposure, the issues that we deal with, those people become the core of information, because they live in the community we broadcast to. They understand the challenges. We talk in the morning that the trains are not running because there's a protest in Langa. Believe me, 5 of the people here were late because they were affected by those trains. And the same with the taxis, the same with the buses, because people don't necessarily come driving in a car listening to the radio. They actually use the public transport. So I think that strengthens our programming because they come with the understanding of the community. They live in the communities where people are being shot and killed every day. And they can say, okay, in my community, in Aitzig or in Khayelitsha, there were 4 killings this weekend. We should get the police on board and talk about this and what they're going to do. So it becomes real. And I think that's our strength and what we offer. In terms of the education, because you raised the issue about education, and this is part of what we do all the time. Education in the township is different and I think far worse than what you'll get in like the former white schools. Now we have 3 types of schooling. We have government schools, then you have former Model C schools, and you have private schools. And we found, we recruit people, kids coming from, youth coming from government school, not necessarily from school, but came through that cool school system. We do have people that came through the Model C school system. We have 1 or 2 that came through the private school system. And the response of the listeners is they prefer the Model C private school, and we always have a struggle with that because now you have a kid from the township schools can't read properly, but they're trained to read the news, and their pronunciation is not English enough. And then you have a situation where people Adrian deal with all those complaints, and people found that person can't read, they can't even pronounce the words properly. So, and we then have to educate our audience about that, because this is what we always, when the vision of Bush Radio started, people must be able to talk in their language of their choice, in their accents of the choice. You see? And don't come and tell us a Model C accent because you had a better education is actually better than the kid from the township's accent. You see? And that education, that's not even something we should be doing. But we find that because people complain, we have to educate our audience about that and what we do. And because people say, no, but you're a radio station. How can you, sometimes if we struggle with money, how can you have a financial, a problem with finances within a radio station? But then we must come back and say, but we are a non-profit entity. The law says community radio is non-profit. So 1, we non-profit. 2, we broadcast to our audience. We can't go to the church and say, we want you to run like a collection for us, because we're not linked to any churches. Our independence are very important. See, so I think in a long way and a sort of roundabout way, I'm trying to answer what you asked.
And I think you are answering my other question that you would have, but about how the money comes for supporting the radio, because but I think you answered the question already, and I think that we talked about the radio, and then I think that we were able to understand how you are operating, and I just would like to ask you if you want to say something else. And I think that for me, I have the answers for mostly what I'm thinking about asking you.
Okay. You did ask about technology on your
Yes.
page,
Yes.
so I'll touch on that quickly. Because a big focus of Bush Radio's work is training, we do have to try and stay as current as possible with technology, which is difficult for a non-profit organization. I think it took us almost 2 years to get a digital studio, because that's where the industry is moving. So it's pointless us being too far back. Because when young people leave here, they need to fall in line with what's going on in the industry. So that's one part of it. However, technology, there's a philosophy that Bush Radio operates around with regards to technology, is that whereas, and we find this, there's many theories around this, around developing countries and technology, how technology leads the way. At Bush Radio, we've consciously taken the position that whatever technology we use must be to solve or must be used because we need to use it. It mustn't be because it's the latest thing. Hence, even the digital studio took very long for us to implement, because what we have works. There's this glut for technology. Oh, we need the latest iPhone. Oh, we need the latest Android update. Oh, we need the fanciest recorder, etc., etc. However, if things are working, why and doing its job well. So it's trying to create that balance between the two, because we have to expose people to the latest technology, but technology must also service us. So for instance, like our newsroom, we don't have developers, internet HTML programmers or web developers in-house. And we looked at, people are going online trying to see what's happening in South Africa. Let's use blogging software, which is free, which is out there, to run a news site. And I'll never forget, one of the experts in South Africa said, "Oh, this is interesting what Bush Radio is doing, but it's not a blog." And we said, "Well, no, it's not a blog. We're using it as a news site. It's not a blog, because technology must serve people. People mustn't serve technology." And I think that's important to note. Even without developing our app, we've taken, we fight with the companies who want to sell us free designs or free, and we say, well, we need it done this way. Can you do it this way? For instance, for us, BlackBerry was a good thing, because we had people streaming us without worrying about cost, as well as being able to watch our videos. I mean, our YouTube videos at one stage were doing very well because people could see in the studio. They could see an artist sing, so they go watch the clip. And the model that a lot of people use is you need to use online to drive listenership figures or readership figures. Bush Radio is in sort of a weird position around it. I don't think we've concretized our own position around it, but it's an interesting thing that becomes a tool for, whereas commercial entities are saying, oh, what happens online needs to drive listenership, which drives advertising. Bush is kind of going, oh, that's another avenue to get the information out. So whether you're an artist, that's another way of you promoting your music. If it's an NGO, we'll demonstrate now. We'll talk about CPR, CPR in the studio, but we'll do a video and put it on YouTube as well so that people can see that that's actually how you do it. Mm-hmm. So I think that's Bush's activist roots with a lot of people at Bush Radio, that technology is not there to serve a profit, to make profit. It's really to get the message out. And if you look at go back to Bush Radio's history, whether it would have been the radio station, TV station, newspaper, etc., the medium at the end of photographs, that's why even during our kids' conference we teach them about photography and how to take photos and because it's about getting the message out. Radio happens to be the tool that we are confident and comfortable with. However, we explore lots of other technologies. For us, that's a very key point, that technology must serve the people, not the other way around. We don't want to wait for when Steve Jobs or Tim Cook do their new. We don't run out there and camp for the latest. We'll see if it works. Does it work? Is it hard? Because there's also a lot of dumping of equipment in South Africa, well, in Africa in general. bad
And
quality, completely.
people do not ask, just like because it's free, don't ask why it's free.
Yeah.
What is
Yeah.
this doing to society
Yeah.
being free,
Yeah.
Mostly.
But we have seen that the audience, the current stats are, and this is also why we have to keep ahead, not ahead, but know what's happening, is if you look at the population now, we finally reached the point where there are more black internet users. It's taken very long, but we're now with this, more black internet users. The interesting phenomenon, though, because of access to resources, the majority of our internet users are cell phone based. That's unique in the world. In fact, the world is catching up to us in terms of, okay. And it's the same in South America, same in many of the developing countries, that your first online experience is on your mobile phone. That says something. In South Africa, it's still second generation phones. It's not the latest, smartphone. So there's sort of a bridge that needs to happen there. We can't. Yes, we're designing an app for an iPhone, maybe, or an Android system. But what about those hand-me-down phones that and if you look at even when Nokia was still a force to reckon with, and they were going to do away with all the aerials in their phone because everybody was going to stream, and that had to change because majority of the listeners are using this cell phone. There needs to be an aerial in the phone, and up to today, you still find aerials in the phone because the radio is still a very, very powerful medium for that. But it's interesting. There's also the whole issue of radio on demand, that young people consume media differently. They want to be able to go from here to there. They want to listen at the time they want to listen to. So that's how radio is sort of evolving as well. And we have to be aware of that. The days of just sitting there and blanketly listening to your radio and having it on for the whole day is over. But the UN released a report last 2 years ago saying people's first exposure to new music is still radio. News is still radio. But yeah, people do want to listen to certain things. We've found an example of where our afternoon show seemed to have just looking at feedback from an audience. We repeated that show at 12 midnight by accident. Actually, we just wanted to try having some content midnight, and they repeated it for a week. And that show never used to get SMSs. And we were looking at the logs going, at midnight. Who's on air at midnight? No man. There were so many SMSs for the presenter at midnight around serious topics. Maybe because people felt comfortable asking questions, or not, it wasn't during their work, or maybe they were, happened to hear this thing. Because there is still a need, and that's what I think many of the commercial stations and the SABC, they don't realize. If we can get an NGO to get about 40 to 60 calls about an issue like psoriasis, we'll be talking about the skin disease in the middle of the day, and she gets back to her office, and she's got all these messages. People don't call on air because they're still shy. Our people are still shy to air their opinion. It only works if we send a message and Brenda sends a message asking a question, and then suddenly you start getting these calls in. Because people are still shy to message, but that's why we create all these platforms. WhatsApp, there was BlackBerry, there was Facebook, Twitter, whatever is available to be able to interact with the station is important for us. So yeah, it's a interesting phase, I think, which radio is going through. the convergence of technologies as well, and how all these technologies are going to integrate to enhance the experience. One of the things we also say is You know, we'd like to be at a point where, in the technological world, they always talk about users. But I think what Bush Radio is really trying to create, and our end goal, if you will, would be a prosumer, where you have somebody where the audience is actually part of creating the content. And that's different. It's not feeding you, not force feeding you information, but that's as this beast evolves over the years. It's changed so many times, but that would be interesting. That's always been its mission, that people who have, I mean, we even have it in our old mission statement, people who have been historically disadvantaged from producing content will be able to produce content. So it's not far off. Whether it takes the form of some sort of odd YouTube radio thing eventually is never mind. The message is still, and I think that's where commercial stations and the public broadcaster have it wrong. Content will remain king. You know that from your photography. The picture, what the picture says is still the most important thing. Whether you're taking it with a Leica or it doesn't matter. And for us, it's the same. Whether it's on FM or FM digital or online or whatever, the message is the most important thing.
You, Brenda, like to say something else?
I think we'll end there. I think we'll end there, because that sort of covers what Bush tries to do. So I'm fine.
Okay, thank you very much for being here, talking to me, and I suppose that I can publish this, yes?
Yes.
Okay, thanks very, very much.
Pleasure.